In the past, I've done a review on the Tern GSD. If you want to see that, there's a link on the screen now. I've also done reviews on bikes that I've ridden to the highest point in Australia, to Mt Kosciuszko. But this time I'm doing something a little bit different. I'm doing a review on the Tern GSD, and I'm riding to the highest point in Australia with a passenger. Stay tuned to see how it went. The Tern GSD is an extremely capable and versatile bike. It was designed to be able to do a few different things, like moving cargo and carrying a couple of children. But did you know that Tern has a few accessories that can configure the GSD into a bike capable of carrying an adult rider and an adult passenger? You could also configure it at the same time to carry two children plus the rider. So I put that to the test by travelling 550 kilometres south of where we are in Sydney to the Australian Snowy Mountains to ride the Tern GSD to the highest point in Australia whilst I was carrying a passenger. But first I'm going to show you some of the accessories that I had to put onto the bike to be able to carry a passenger and to make it a bit easier to ride the bike up to Kosciuszko. Since I was carrying my camera gear, I needed a place to store my camera bag, so I added the Tern transporter rack to the front of the bike, and that can carry up to 20 kilos of cargo. It includes a couple of bottle holder attachments. It can hold a 300 by 400 millimeter crate, and it has two bungee straps to keep things securely tied down. I also used the Tern quick release C and T clamps to make it easier to change out the front mounted accessory. I always like putting mirrors on my bikes, so I mounted the left and right the Zeffel Dewback 2 mirror set. And I like using the Nog bell because it's nice and slim, and I put that on all my e-bikes that I sell. If you're going to carry heavy loads or passengers, Tern have made a heavy duty stand called the Atlas stand. It's designed to provide more stability than the standard stand, and it also lifts the back of the wheel off the ground, which is much more stable for loading passengers and cargo. You can see on this bike I actually left the original stand there just for comparison purposes. Interesting thing is, with both stands they don't interfere with one another, but they also lift the bike completely off the ground and give it complete stability on four legs, so both wheels are off the ground if you need that. The standard stand typically lifts the front wheel off the ground. The Atlas stand lifts the rear wheel off the ground and makes it more stable for putting cargo and passengers on. On the lower rear part of the bike, I've mounted the Sidekick lower deck stand. The lower deck is a permanent attachment that also doubles as a support for pannier bags. It supports the bottom of the pannier bags, but also when you're carrying a passenger, it gives them a little bit more scope to place their feet. If you're carrying a passenger or passengers, I think getting the Tern Sidekick wheel guards are essential. It stops things like dresses, skirts, children's feet, all sorts of things getting caught in or getting tangled up with the wheel or the chain on the back of the bike. It's just a safety thing that's really quite clever, and I think is essential if you're carrying passengers especially. I also like adding folding foot pedals because it just makes the bike easier to store. It's easy to put several bikes close together in a garage or in a storage area. It's also much easier to transport the bikes if you're using something like a platform rack on the back of your car. The last thing that I added was the captain's chair on the back of the bike. Now the captain's chair comes with a padded high back and seat, which is obviously for carrying passengers. You can remove that if you want to carry cargo. It will fit a standard 400 by 600 millimeter crate in conjunction with the Sidekick joyride bars. These are one of the options for handlebars for the rear passenger. There's two options available. I prefer these ones. It gives you a little bit more, there's a little bit more comfort for the passenger, but there's also that ability to carry a crate and to carry cargo quite safely. The joyride handlebars are sort of squared off, and the seat, the captain's chair, is also squared off when you remove the padding, and it just takes a crate very easily. The one thing that I did add for my own comfort was the Thudbuster Short Travel G4 suspended seat post. This just takes the bumpiness out of any ride. It was really good on the bumpy road surface that we travelled on to get to Mt Kosciuszko, but also around town. It's really nice to just take those sharp jolts out of any ride. So finally, let's have a look at the ride. We start typically at Charlotte Pass, which is around 1,835 metres above sea level. And then we ride a 9-kilometre road, which is all a dirt road, up to a place called Rawson Pass, which is at about 2,100 metres. And then another 128 metres up in elevation, which is about a 1.7 kilometre walk to the top of Mt Kosciuszko. So you can't ride a bike beyond Rawson Pass, but you can ride up to Rawson Pass, and it's about a 40-minute walk from there to the top of Mt Kosciuszko. Just after you leave Charlotte Pass and head up towards Rawson Pass, you go through the top of the tree line, and from that point on there are no more trees. It's a very alpine area, it's very exposed, it's very cold. Typically, even in summertime, we can get some hot days up there, but most of the time it's cold. I think you'll see in some of the footage my wife's got a blanket on her lap because she was so cold. She was not riding, she was just a passenger, and I was traveling at up to 20 kilometers an hour at places. So she was getting quite a cool breeze. It was probably about 10 degrees or maybe a little bit less Celsius. And in that situation, if you've got a passenger, you probably need a blanket or some sort of cover or a good jacket if it's cold. If it's warm, it's obviously not a problem. But on this morning, it was pretty cool, and it was the middle of summer here. It is 550 kilometers south of Sydney. It is 2,000 or more meters above sea level, so you obviously get what you get when you're up in the alpine regions. And because it's so exposed and relatively flat, the top of Australia is a fairly flat sort of a place, the wind is always there. You've always got wind and you always feel the cold. The good thing about this bike, I fitted a few accessories, one for carrying my camera gear at the front of the bike, one for carrying my wife at the back of the bike, and a few other little things like the folding pedals and mirrors, which really didn't do anything for this trip or didn't add any extra utility to the trip. The bike was pretty much unchanged. It's a standard bike configuration. I used the standard Moto X tyres that were on the bike, and it performed really well. It's a bit of a bumpy trip, but these bikes, I found that the Tern bikes are really robust. They can take this kind of punishment. I'd normally ride a mountain bike on these trails, or on these roads, but I've ridden Vectrons up and down this area. I've done the Tern GSD, and we've also done a Tern HSD up on these roads, and they all perform really well. So I guess the point of that is that if you're riding this bike on a sealed surface, it's fantastic. If you're riding it on a dirt road, as long as it's not a fire trail or something that's, you know, quite aggressive that you'd really need a mountain bike for, then this bike can handle it quite well. There's no problem. In terms of the bike's capacity to carry cargo, it's rated at 200 kilograms total, including the mass of the bike. So the bike is about 27.5 kilos with the battery fitted. If I go through the numbers, I'm 93 kilos, my camera gear was about 10 kilos, my wife's 63 kilos, that adds up to 193.5 kilos. You add a few kilos for the captain's chair and the front rack and the other little bits and pieces, you're up near 200 kilos. So this bike was pretty maxed out. It's using the performance Bosch motor. I have to admit, even on turbo mode, on some of the steepest bits, I struggled, but it would have been impossible to ride that much mass, that far, that high, on that steeper hill without electric assistance. Well, I couldn't do it anyway. I'm sure there's some people who could, but I certainly couldn't. So I had struggled in a couple of places, but we got there. You know, my daughters were riding other bikes and they certainly went past us, but I was only behind by a few minutes. The point is, the point that I'm trying to make here is that the Bosch motor is a really substantial power plant and it's really well suited to this bike. So if you've got some steep hills to do, if you've got a lot of cargo to carry, if you want to carry a passenger, the GSD's a really good bike for doing that with. I guess the other point here is, if you had someone that wanted to get to a place like Mt Kosciuszko, for example, that were not able to do it for one reason or another, and that they're able to sit in the back of this bike in the captain's chair, then all of a sudden that person has a bit more accessibility. If they've got a willing rider or a willing person to ride the bike for them, then this bike can open up, apart from being just a transport for another person, this bike can open up a whole lot of opportunity for that other person in the back. And I think that's a really good thing. So I really like the GSD. I find it a very practical bike. It's easy to transport for a cargo bike. Cargo bikes are usually very hard to transport, but with the compact dimensions and the long tail on the GSD, it makes it very easy to load it onto something like a Tern rack that you stick on the, not a Tern, a Tula rack that you stick on the back of your bike, or a Buzz rack, or any of the other brands that you put on a tow bar on your bike to carry e-bikes. It's really easy to carry it that way. Most cargo bikes can't be carried like that. They need to be put into a van or onto a truck. So this is really good. We carried this on our normal bike carrier down, for, like I said, 550 kilometers south of here without a problem, plus another e-bike on the back of the rack. So it's accessible, it's usable as a bike, it's transportable, and you have the facility to be able to carry cargo and to carry a passenger, and that's a great thing. And I think this bike is really good for that. You don't necessarily need to have the most expensive bike in the range. The performance mode is perfect. There's models coming out in the future with more torque, and more torque's great. That would have made it even easier for me to get up that mountain, but I can tell you it's pretty hard getting up there anyway, and this did the job. So depending on where you are, I ride some very steep hills in Sydney, and I can get this bike up those hills without a problem with cargo on the back. So for most people, I think it's fine. If you need more torque, then those models are pretty much available very soon. So to summarise, GSD is a great bike, it's versatile. I hope you've liked this video. If you have, please hit the like, subscribe and share buttons so that you can be notified of when we upload new content. I'm Andrew from Form and Design. Thanks for watching.